So we're hearing Mr. Billy Bragg sing the international song of unions and labor. We're about to start an interview with Mr. Mark Belli, plumber for Plumbers Union number 1 in New York City. And we're going to talk about some issues that are going on with the union right now, very controversial issues. And as you all know, I'm personally very pro-union, and so is Mark Belli. But there's some issues with some decision-making that's happening within the union that kind of reeks of some old-school stuff. So let's join Mark right now on the radio, WUSB Stony Brook. Mark Belli, thanks so much for joining us on Finn's Revolution on WUSB Stony Brook. Welcome to the airwaves.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. And you're a longtime union member?
Yeah, basically right out of high school, 1988, I got into Plumbers Local number 1, and I've been a union tradesman my whole life.
Right. So you've been a plumber all these years, and you worked through apprentice right up, right?
This is all I've ever wanted to do is be a plumber since I was in grade school.
Okay.
And all I've ever done.
All right. So this is what you've been doing. You've been doing it since '88.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yes,
so obviously you're a union guy. The union in general has been pretty good to you, right?
The union's been a very good thing. The 3 plumbers unions in New York City, back in, I think, 1997, the 3 plumbers unions merged. And, we were local 2, Manhattan and the Bronx, and there was local 1, Brooklyn and Queens, and local 371, Staten Island. And the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters had us all merged. And when we did, a lot of people's lives changed. Overall, I think it was good for the industry that there was one union for New York City. You have to understand that the plumbers unions go back over 100 years before they were organized. And, how long has the Brooklyn Bridge been around? So people would work in their neighborhoods. People would work in their home locals. 100 years ago, you would never imagine a guy from Staten Island, even 50 years ago, 75 years ago, a guy from Staten Island coming to work in Manhattan. It wasn't the same industry that it is today. So.
Right. So when did that merge happen, approximately?
I believe it was 1997.
Okay.
Is when the merge, maybe it was 96, and the 3 unions of New York City, the 3 plumbers unions, became one.
Right.
The new Plumbers Local number 1. And, a lot of people's lives changed because the politics of each local were very different. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the average member, did better, but it's a different world today.
Right. And so what would you say the negatives of the merge were?
What was the negative of the merge?
I mean, was it a lack of local autonomy or having to jump all around the city to work, or what would you say?
Well, at the very beginning, there was a different wage rate for each borough. We had a business manager at the time. His name is Donnie Scopani, and I really give the guy a lot of credit. He was appointed as the business manager throughout the merge for the 3 locals, and he's the guy who brought everything together. And he had some really tough decisions and some tough steps to take. And my understanding is they went into a negotiation meeting out at the airport at a hotel, and the Contractors Association wanted the 3 locals, when they were merging, to go to the lowest pay rate, for which I think was Staten Island, to take everybody and set them down to the Staten Island Local 371 pay rate, and then over the next 3 years catch up to the Local 2 Manhattan pay rate. And Donnie Scalfani, from what I understand, looked at the Contractors Association and said, "Thank you for your time. There's nothing for us to negotiate." And he took all of his officers and walked out. And, I mean, I got to give the guy credit. He brought the local together. Now, the bad points of that, and what ultimately happened was they established a rate of pay for all boroughs, and then every 6 months there was a 25-cent increase for the guys in Manhattan, which really hurt us, Manhattan and the Bronx, because we were used to getting like $1.10, $1.05 increases every 6 months, and we were held back to 25 cents an hour increase in 6 months. But the other locals were getting like $1.50, $2.50, and they were catching up until ultimately 3 or 4 years after that, everybody was at the same wage rate for New York City. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but he did it. He brought everybody together. If you go throughout the United Association and other areas of other locals who have merged, I hear stories that 10, 15 years later, people are still fighting with each other. And, on the bad side of that, there were guys in Local 2 that our wages were held back. But right, wrong, or indifferent, the guy did it. He brought everybody together, and he really made a major step for labor, for the plumbers union, at least in New York City.
Right, a larger negotiating force is always a better situation for labor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So some short-term sacrifices based on those decisions for a couple of the locals, but then everything caught up, and it was all for the best overall.
There were some bumps in the road, and there still are.
Yeah.
And absolutely, the average member does better.
So now, at your local, you have a board, right? That kind of operates ostensibly on behalf of the members, right?
We have basically 11 full-time business agents, I think, and we have a financial secretary that's full-time, and we have a business manager who's full-time, and then we have 2 or 3 organizers who are appointed. And everyone's got their own area in New York City, and this is what happens. I happen to be right now a civil servant plumber for the city of New York. I think I did my 21 years with the local for my pension with that, and now I'm like 9.5 years working for the city as a plumber. I had a couple of issues, particularly with my arm, that I got hurt, and it doesn't work the right way. And so I decided I'm better off going to work for the city, where you're not being pushed, because that's the thing about construction. Being a tradesman, you're just a number, and right. I believe today they count how many feet of pipe you put in today, every day, and at the end of the week, when it's time for cutbacks, hey, this guy's performing less than this other guy, and that's the nature of the beast.
Right.
So I went to work for the city, and this is what I hope to be doing for the next 11 years until I retire with the 2 pensions.
Which would be great. All right, so back to Local 1.
Back to Local 1.
They all the people you just mentioned, the positions you just mentioned, except for the ones that are appointed, which is only a few of them, are elected positions, correct? Correct,
and there are minor officers too.
Right.
But for minor positions.
So how often do the members get together or I should say represent by voting for these positions?
Roughly every 3 years.
Okay.
When there are vacancies in full-time positions, they do have special elections, but the general elections are every 3 years.
Okay. So it used to be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it used to be that people just could run for the position, right?
It still is. Anyone can get nominated for any position.
Okay.
It still is.
And how do those nominations take place?
Well, the nominations, the president of the local, which is a part-time position, opens up a union meeting after everyone's been notified. There are rules in our bylaws. There are rules in our parent international union, the Constitution of the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters in the United States. There are rules that so many days before nominations, people have to be notified of the nominations. And then the president of the local opens up the nominations to the floor, and they go one office to the next from the top down. What is it, 40? Let me just think. I think there's 40...
40 electable positions or so?
I think it's more than that. I mean, I can count, but
no, that's fine. But it's a lot. It's a lot. It's not just 3 guys or three positions. It's like 40 plus.
Well, what? Yes, and what it used to be was, it used to be that even the merge happened in 96 and 97, and then we had our first election in basically 4 years after that, and every time since the merge, since the new local won, it's always people been running independently. And in 2012, the officers of the local introduced what they call slate voting.
Okay, so let's hold off just 1 second. So it used to be that if you and I we're members of the union, I'm at the meeting, I could nominate you, even though you're not necessarily associated with anybody else who's also running. Correct?
Correct, and that's still true. But today, and since 2012,
right.
What they do is they have slate voting, and they nominate the slate first, which goes on one side of the ballot position, the left side, and then anybody else who gets nominated, they go on the right side of the ballot position. So that's the biggest distinction.
Okay, so let's just so our audience understands this. Slate means it's a team of people, right? It's a group of people together.
Correct.
Okay.
Which in this case they call the administration slate.
Okay.
That's their name.
Okay. And they all get grouped together as a single choice, let's say. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, they have one button on the screen that if you hit the one button, all of their candidates light up. So, with one button, you can elect, 47 or 48 of their candidates with one button and walk away. In days of old, you would have to vote to each candidate one at a time.
Each position, right.
Each position, correct.
All right. So on the right side of the screen are the other individuals that are not on the quote-unquote slate?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let me just ask you, because I don't know this. Yeah, sure. The candidates that are there any other slates that are capable of being voted for, or is there only one?
Well, they open up the meeting to any slate nominations first. And then what has happened is the administration team gets up and they nominate their slate of officers.
Right.
And then the president of the local, in the last three general elections, has gotten up on the microphone and said, is there any other slates to be nominated? Now, out of those three elections, the three general elections starting from 2012, 2015, and this past June, one time there was another slate. A fellow named Jim Feeney, he put together a slate called the Plumbers for Democratic Union, or I believe that's what the name is.
Okay.
And there were two slates that ran off. He didn't have a full slate with all the offices, but he had 10 people who ran against the slate. It was not successful. But in 2012, the membership I'm sitting there in the audience, and they're talking about slate voting, and it had not been brought to our attention ahead of time. It was kind of like they pulled the wool over the membership's eyes.
Right.
And nobody since then have really understood how they did that. It's upsetting.
So
it is what it is.
So this setup was kind of like a classic back room kind of a setting where all of a sudden you guys arrive, you're right there for the big meeting, you're getting ready to vote and nominate and all the different things you do, and you find out that slate voting is now in effect rather than it being discussed beforehand.
That's kind of what happened. There was a letter that was mailed out that in 2012 that says that in an effort to prevent long voting lines, and on Saturday, June 2nd, 2012, the election committee has approved slate voting in the general election. Members will have the opportunity to cast individual votes or cast one vote for an entire slate if they choose. So they're giving the opportunity for members to be, after they did the slate voting, the slate nominations, they're giving the members the opportunity to nominate people individually, but then they put them all individually on the right-hand side, unless the 1 year that they had a slate. And one button elects 40, how many?
40 plus.
20, about over 25 members, 25 to 40.
Positions, right. Mm-hmm.
Positions, right. And in my mind, one button, we had the presidential election, where that's the only political thing where it's the president and the vice president, the president and his assistant. Every other office runs on their own merit throughout the United States.
Right.
And slate voting was approved by the Department of Labor. There are different traditions in New York City and throughout the country for organized labor. The laborers, from what I understand, have had slate voting for 60 to 80 years, maybe even more. So I don't really have a problem with that. But when the three locals of New York City merged, you see, in Local 2 and Local 1, what would happen is people would get nominated. And after they get nominated, they would draw for ballot positions. Mm-hmm. Now, a ballot position is something that impacts the election. If you have 2 or more people running for an office, if you, particularly like our executive board of 4 officers. So one time I remember there was like 10 or 11 people who were running for the executive board. If you're the first person in the random ballot position, typically you get a little bit more votes. You get a better position.
Right.
Which row you're on. Local 371 was a little bit different because 371 Staten Island, they didn't have choosing for ballot position, but they had a drawing that the president of the local did. Either way, the past history for, I believe, 100 years was that people would be either draw for their ballot position throughout the locals, or they would be selected for ballot positions. And when they came out with slate voting, there is something called the Labor Management Disclosure Standards Act that's instituted by the Office of Labor Management Standards. And in that law that came out years ago, there's called a Bill of Rights for working members. And in that Bill of Rights is the right to nominate. And I believed that right to nominate was violated by my local. So, what I did was I went to the federal courts.
Well, yeah, but let's hold on. We'll get to that part in 1 second. I just want to set up the whole scenario first so our listeners fully understand. So the way you look at it is that, and the way a lot of people obviously look at it, is that the creation of this implemented slate voting where one button votes for everybody, that type of a deal, actually creates an undue advantage to the people who are on that slate. Is that correct?
That's correct. You needed, under their rules, you needed to have a minimum of 10 people in the general election to have a slate. In this last election, there was only 3 people who ran, 4 people who were nominated. In the 2012 election, there was only 9 people who ran. They were 1 short, and they couldn't do a slate. In 2015, there was 10 people who ran, and there was a slate, but it didn't work out to be,
right.
It didn't get elected. The other thing is that I really believe is in our local constitution and bylaws, page 16, paragraph G, it says, any and all candidates running for office must pick for the ballot position on the ballot. The financial secretary treasurer is responsible for providing ballots, and that's the rule that I believe that my local office is violated, because nobody can, how do I say this? There is no question that the bylaws and the Constitution of Plumbers Local Number 1 requires each and every candidate to draw for their ballot position. And also there is no question that at the nomination meetings, candidates did not draw for each ballot position in the 2018 general election. That's basically the scenario,
right?
That I feel was violated.
So you believe you believe an undue advantage is being given to the candidates who are running on the slate because they don't have to separately choose individually for a position.
I like the way you said that. Yes.
Okay. Well, I just want to be clear for our audience, because sometimes when we're involved in things, we fully understand. I mean, I'm like that all the time myself. Fully understand something, and we take for granted we have, that other people will also understand it. So I think it's just got to be made nice and clear for our audience. So now we can set it up. So there are people in my union who are actually upset at me for doing what I did, which is the next step that you're going to talk about, I assume. That's right.
And they don't really have a clear understanding of what I'm against. I'm not against trying to oust everybody or chastise everyone for what's been done. I just want this to be corrected going forward. I'm against slate voting until such time that the membership sees it fit to have slate voting, which, there's a past practice, there's a history of doing it the way we're doing it.
Right.
And I believe very strongly in a union member's right to organize and to elect the leaders that it sees fit. This is a very, could you imagine if the Democratic Party or the Republican Party came into New York State and say, okay, for now we're going to have this party button on the top.
Right.
You can vote old Democrat by hitting one button.
Right.
You know, and again, I like I said, and I think I said this twice. I'm sorry, three times.
No, that's okay.
The laborers have been doing this for 80, 90 years. That's how they organize themselves. That's fine with me. But the plumbers, you know, it kind of was underhanded.
Right.
The reason why I think this actually happened is there was a fella named John Feeney who got elected for a full-time officer as a business agent for 2 elections, and he was gaining momentum. He was gaining votes to his crew. And when they saw that John Feeney was doing better in the voting, I believe that's when they came up with this.
Right.
You know, that's when they came up with slate voting as a means to take control of, you know, everything.
So just for you guys out there listening right now, we're talking to Mark Belli, member of Plumbers Local 1 and activist in trying to get some rules followed that were built into the union regulations for a reason, and apparently are being, shall we say, circumvented a bit at the moment. And you're listening to WUSB Stony Brook, and we'll be back in 1 second.
This land is your land, and this land is my land, from the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went a-walking, this land is your land, and this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. When the sun comes shining, then I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, the dust clouds rolling, the voice coming chanting, and the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me.
Mark Belli of the Plumbers Local Number 1 in New York City is returned with us here at WUSB Stony Brook on Finn's Revolution. And Mark, we've been talking about some, shall we say, practices that are currently happening in the union that don't quite sit right with some of the rules that are in your constitution and bylaws. I know you just received something just now. Would you like to go into it?
Well, I actually received it yesterday. One of my friends in the union, Anthony Valenti, he worked with me when he was first year, and you know, this goes back in the 90s, and now he's a super, and he sent me on Friday a message on a text that says, from Anthony Valenti, he ran in years ago for president of Plumbers Local Number 1, which was a part-time position, and he wrote when I about slate voting, we didn't adopt slate voting. Slate voting was shoved down our throats by the administration after Feeney, which is John Feeney, was elected, Jimmy Feeney was 15 votes from becoming an officer. This is the year that 2012 when he got pushed out, or 2000 and the year before that, becoming an officer. And I was voted 60 votes from becoming the president of Local 1. In addition, the independent plumbers won 6 convention delegate positions and scared the officers of Local 1. So what he's saying is, I may not have read it so good, but what he's saying is he was this independent plumbers for democratic society. They were gaining momentum. They were gaining votes. They were getting up there. And that was the reason that the incumbent officers, I mean, John Feeney was a full-time officer for 6 years. He got elected twice. And then the third time he ran, he didn't get elected. And they had to do something because otherwise Local 1 today might be a two-party system. And, you know, power is something that they wanted to preserve.
Right.
So this is all what really, for those years, kind of turned in my stomach, because I really believe, I always ran independently when I ran for offices. And, you know, I always ran on my own merit. I never believed on being part of a ticket or a slate or anything. And I never really understood why all these people needed to cross-endorse each other and run on a slate, why we even had that kind of society in our local.
Right. Okay. So let's just to be clear about something, because before the break you had said that it's based on the fact that what the rules of the Constitution are, that let's say everyone voted, okay, all your members voted, and a majority, let's say, decided to have slate voting. That would be okay if everyone had a say.
If that vote, you know, as a matter of fact, at this past election, I'm just going to go into a certain piece of it.
Sure.
This past election, I decided not to run, and I ran for what's called the election committee. And we'll get into the bulk of that later, because I read to you that the election committee voted to have slate voting, which is why I wanted to be on the election committee. And then at the night of nominations, having been elected to the election committee for this general election, before they opened up the nominations for slate voting, there was a union meeting that 6 of us got up to speak against slate voting. It was never adopted by the membership, and we were basically shut down.
Right.
And that infuriated me. And this is the meeting before nominations. And, you know, where did slate voting come from? How is slate voting even allowed under our bylaws? I don't understand it. And the bylaws has its own rules to amend the bylaws. You have to have a nomination. You have to have a motion made on the floor that's signed by so many members, right. I think 15 or 20, and then it's read off at 3 union meetings, not discussed at the first 2, the motion, and at the 3rd union meeting, it's voted upon. That's never happened. These rules have been in effect since they came in effect during our merge.
Right. It was just an autocratic move, essentially, by people to preserve
right.
power.
If the membership wanted something like this, I wouldn't have a problem.
Exactly.
But it was kind of backhanded how it, and the
right.
offices that are there, the offices that we have in Plumbers Local No. 1, Michael Apuzzo is now our business manager. Excuse me. And okay. I've had since the 90s. The early 90s, the utmost respect for Mike Apuzzo. And I stood up when he was nominated. He was the only person nominated to be the number 1 guy in our local. I stood up and clapped. I think all of the officers that are union meetings sit up on the dais. I don't have a problem with any of them being officers. What I have a problem with is what slate voting is going to breed
right.
20 years, 30 years down the road.
Right. So it's not that you're against. So it's not that you're against, of course, any of the people who are in the positions. It's the system that you're against.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. I'm against slate voting. I think it's going to hurt our local.
Right. So now, what would you say? Well, let's. How about you fill us in a little on some of the legal actions you have taken, and let us know where those things currently stand, because you've taken a couple of different ones, and the results of them are pretty interesting.
Well, I went down to federal court downtown Brooklyn. And I kind of started asking questions. And I went down to state court and I started asking questions. And typically when you file documents in courts, you have to be an attorney to do it. But there is something called being a pro se
Right.
Litigant, which is what I did. You can go down to court
Right.
and file an action against someone without being represented by an attorney, being pro se.
Right.
So I spent some time researching this, and I found a book that another union official in another union referenced it as the Troublemaker's Handbook for union members. And it's called Democratic Rights for Union Membership, a guide to internal union democracy. And it goes into a whole bunch of things that you can do. And that's where I read that you can go to federal court if any of your voting rights under the rights of workers established by the Department of Labor. And Chapter 7 talks about going into federal court, which is what I did, and I filed pro se an action
Right.
against Local 1 and some of the officers in Local 1. That's what I did.
So basically, what you're doing in the court is you are filing to claim that the union is operating in violation of their bylaws, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And so that got filed, and what was the result of that?
Well, even though the Labor Management Standards Disclosure Act states that members have the right, and you have to read the whole act to understand this, but members have the right to nominate.
Mm-hmm.
What they found, what the judge said, after I filed the papers, I filed them a couple of days before the election, and what my papers said was I wanted to stop slate voting. And what I was really looking for was I was looking for the Department of Labor or the courts or someone to say, let's lock off that one button. I was on the election committee. I asked questions. What happens if somebody the day before the election drops out of the election? And they assured me that they could lock off that candidate's button if that person decided at the last minute not to be nominated. And that's what I was doing with the courts. It wasn't against the officers. It
Right.
was against slate voting.
Right.
And I was seeking the judge to lock off to lock off that slate voting button. And what the judge decided a couple of days before is the judge responded with something that's called sua sponte, which is a court term that when she took my entire motion and digested it, she determined that there was not enough subject matter jurisdiction for her to take on my argument. And she dismissed it, and it kind of, here I am. You've seen a copy of the brief that I filed. I spent a lot of time working on it, and it kind of killed me.
Well, she kind of decided. I'm guessing she, by my reading of this, it seems to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like she decided that she didn't have the authority to rule in this particular case, that was out of her jurisdiction of power. And right? Would you say that?
Her reasoning for this was because she didn't believe that there was a federal issue at stake.
Right.
She pointed out she didn't rule on the merits of the case in any way, and she said that in her decision.
Right.
But she kind of said federal court because there's not a federal issue at stake, is not the place to take up this argument. And had I went to state court, I believe it would have taken 7 to 9 years for me to get, through that system. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit,
Right.
but I mean, Judge Chin did not feel that there was a federal question
Right.
under the LMRDA, which would have provided the court with the subject matter jurisdiction
Right.
over my complaint.
Right.
Judge Chin dismissed my complaint because, in her opinion, issues that I raised regarding slate voting boiled down to misconduct by the union officials.
Right.
Judge Chin found that misconduct by union officials in administering an election does not provide the court with a basis
Right.
for exercising subject matter jurisdiction under the LMRDA Act.
Right. No federal law applied there, she's saying, right? So
No federal issue applies, right?
Right. Okay, so now you receive this this negative back, and you and I actually met on the day of voting, and which is why
after the election, right?
After the election, but that day, and it was a lot of people were very that I was meeting that day were very riled up about the way things were rolling. Some people were very frustrated to the point of apathy, like, oh, what can you do? But you're still going out and trying to get all of this changed and publicize this issue. What has been the reaction well, let's start with your fellow workers. What's been your reaction from your fellow workers on your activism in this area?
A lot of people don't want to come near me, don't want to talk about it.
Sure.
They're afraid to get involved. Their jobs are at stake. The power that delegates have over union members, especially for employment, it's scary. I mean, and I can't really blame anybody. I mean, what would happen? There were horror stories, and I went through some of them. There was a time that I couldn't get a job.
Right.
Civil service plumbers are different where I'm at. I took a test to get my job, and I have some seniority, so it's very different in the position I'm in.
Right.
But my heart still, I mean, if my arm wasn't hurt the way that it is, and I'm still fighting with workers' comp to get the third surgery on my arm, and there's a fourth one up on the shoulder after that, but that's basically why I'm a civil servant. I would be on the outside working with my union brothers, which is what I wanted to do. But getting back to everything that we're saying, members, I'm sorry, I really didn't answer your question. Members either want to stay away from me and stay clear from the commotion, or I really find that a large group of members are not even aware of the rules that, I mean, you have to understand, I'm talking about 2012.
Right.
There's been classes and classes of apprenticeship and guys who have retired, and it's been years since the merge, over 20 years, and guys are unaware of how things should be done.
Right.
It's
So do you
don't want to be involved?
Right, because they've come up in a certain world as attrition has happened, and that's how they think it is. Right.
Right.
So are you getting? I really should ask you a little more pointedly. Are you getting even, I should say, non-public support from members, your fellow workers? In other words, are people saying, "I think you're doing the right thing"?
Well, there's people. There are some members who have come to me and said, "Why are you doing this?" And once I let them read my documentation, once I talk to them, I'd say 95% of them are turning.
Right.
Unfortunately, the officers won't engage any of these conversations, and they're very, very brisk about it. Oh, well, we're allowed to do slate voting because the Department of Labor says we're allowed to do it. Well, you might be allowed. It might be legal to do slate voting, but until the local adopts it in our bylaws,
Right.
And members, there were members who were outraged with this.
Oh, sure.
6 people got up at that union meeting, and they were all shut down.
Right. So now let me ask you. So now you have this decision coming down. Obviously, the last election happened, and they rolled it through with their slate voting system, as they've been doing recently. And what's your next step? What else? What's the next step? What's the next thing for you to do, Mark?
I don't know what the next step is, to be honest with you, but I have 2.5 years to figure it out before there's another election.
Right.
There's an outside possibility that if other people in my union follow my thought process, that we could see. Here's the thing: union members, and not just union members, but people in society, need to hold our officers are responsible for what they do.
Right.
And if that comes about, if everybody in the union says to me, Mark, you may be right, but we don't care. And what do we have? 5,000-6,000 members in the union? It's never going to go anywhere.
Right.
It's not a lot of things in society. It's not about what's right. It's not about what's wrong. And then things change over time.
Right.
I have a friend. I'm not even going to get into that. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that this is kind of in your blood right now, and I personally think you're doing the right thing, trying to hold the union to its rules. And
I appreciate it.
I think you have a struggle in front of you because people are afraid for their jobs and they don't know what their actions will result in terms of something retaliatory. However, and not that would necessarily happen, but it could, and it could certainly be in people's minds. And I think holding the people in power to accountability is a good thing in every aspect of society. And I think you're doing the right thing. I think you should, and I'm sure you're doing this, but I think you should continue to educate your fellow union members and co-workers, because I think you're on the right path, Mark, and I think you have an uphill battle because, well,
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure every battle that's out there. I mean, you can't win every battle, but
right.
But that doesn't mean you should be. When you believe in something, well, like I believe in this, and again, it's not the officers who are in power. It's it's the system,
right?
And the membership of the local has the power to change that.
Right.
Local 3, the electricians union, they have a referral system. They have a list. Their officers, when it's time to hire a job, they turn to the hiring list, and the next person on the list is the person that gets a job.
Right.
Our system, the way that we do things, where the business agents give people jobs, it's not the best system that we have, but it's the one that we have to live with.
Right. But in order to make changes, the membership should be included in the decision-making process, and it should be brought to votes, and that's how it should be. It shouldn't be done in a back room.
Right. The systems need to be overhauled.
Right.
When they get overhauled, it shouldn't just be the officers telling, okay, this is how we should change this. It should have member input.
Right. It should be transparent.
Right.
Exactly. Mark Belli, Plumbers Union 1, fighting to hold his union accountable for to their own bylaws. Something that's very important because these are bylaws that were set up with the membership inputs, and they shouldn't be ignored. And Mark Belli, I would love to thank you so much for joining us on Finn's Revolution on WUSB Stony Brook. It's been very insightful. This interview will be up on both the archive this week at WUSB.FM, and also it will be up on YouTube as an audio file beginning next week. So you can go back and reference it at any time. Mark, thank you so much for joining us and being brave out there.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
You got it.
This is a public service announcement with guitar. Know your rights. All three of them. Number one, you have the right.
Mark Belli from the union, the Plumbers Union right there, and we'd like to thank Mark for being brave enough to stand up and hold his union accountable for their own bylaws, which are written for the members and by the members originally. So, thanks, Mark, for joining us on that. And I think we'll actually start the Clash song one more time since we have the moment. And Kenny's up next, and things are going to be crazy on his show as always. Stay tuned for that. Until next week, my name is Finn. Just remember, don't do anything that I wouldn't do. I'll see you.